Hello and good evening. Marcus C. Williams here, and let's talk news. So, recently this week, we've had a ton going on, and it seems like every day we see more and more going on all across our nation and all across the world. We see that Turkey and Syria are still in upheaval because of the earthquake there. Fortunately, there are still lives being saved, even though it is many days afterward. I was able to see some of the pictures from the ground there and where the epicenter of the earthquake was. And oh boy, yeah, I mean, we're talking about made some really serious crevices and canyons there. I mean, looks pretty bad, especially when you see all the destruction that goes along with it that's not directly near the epicenter. So it's kind of crazy over there. And I really wish everybody the best in Turkey and Syria, because it seems as though nobody wants to talk about the victims in Syria, but we're not going to talk about that right now. And may they be blessed and be well as well. So, boom, let's jump right into it. People, there is so much going on right now. It continues to get further and further out of control. Just today, not too many hours ago, there was a pipe bomb found behind a church, okay, on a railroad track, right behind a church. So if that would have gone off, it would have destroyed possibly a train and the church. So if you haven't been noticing, or maybe you haven't seen it or paid attention or couldn't pay attention because it hasn't been covered in the news, but I do my best to cover it as much as possible. The rise in anti-Christian hate in America is off the chain. And the fact that there are so many politicians and elected officials who identify as Christian and Catholic and do not say a word, not a peep, is absolutely abhorrent, unacceptable, and extremely unsettling. We need to start speaking up and being vocal about all the anti-Christian hate that is not only happening in this country, but across the world. Okay? In Ukraine right now, the Ukrainian government is persecuting Christians, torturing them and killing them. This is happening by the Ukrainian government, which we keep throwing tons of money at. I'm not making this up. This is a real thing. And we saw with this incident earlier, the pipe bomb behind the church. That's wow. Just wow. Where are our elected officials speaking about this? Have you heard one say anything? Absolutely not. We had a bishop that was murdered in his home in Los Angeles. A bishop that just happened. Okay. Did anybody say anything about that? Absolutely not. It's as if it's okay for horrible stuff to be done to Christians. Why is that okay? That should not be okay. It should not be okay if it's done to anybody, more or less the people that elected officials say that they are affiliated with. It's very interesting. Very, very interesting. This bishop is killed and nobody says anything, murdered in his house. It's sad. And it's extremely disappointing to see the direction that our country is going in. And more people need to start speaking up, because a bishop gets killed in his house. Then they find a pipe bomb behind the church on a railroad track, which would, in essence, destroy both the railroad and the church. But mute, silent. Everybody has nothing to say on these issues. It's very disconcerting. But moving on, there's just a whole bunch of stuff that's going on right now that's extremely crazy and off the chain. Today, we had the fourth major blackout this month. Really, technically, we had a fourth and a fifth major blackout this month today. Two of them. Two very big ones on opposite sides of the country. Oakland, 54,000 people are without power in Oakland. Yeah, now if you know anything about Oakland, you're probably thinking, oh man, Oakland for years, I've thought about that, has been a hotbed of crime and unfortunate circumstances for many of the members that live there. Yes, this is true. However, Oakland has been vastly gentrified over the last decade or two. It's gotten very, very gentrified. So now with this 54,000 power outage, I question what will happen to all of the people with the electric vehicles that now live there. Will they be able to charge their cars? No, because there's no electricity. What will they do? It's a very interesting question. More so than that, it's an interesting question. With 54,000 people without power, I expect and anticipate highly that the number of lootings and robberies will skyrocket. And I guarantee you very limited coverage of it will be available because they don't want to taint the area with the amount of crime that will ensue from these power outages. Now, the interesting thing is this is the largest power outage that we've had in some time, 54,000 people. And this month, we already had 3 other ones, one in San Francisco, one in Chicago, and one in Seattle, all on the same day, all at various hubs of internet network traffic. It's very interesting. Very interesting. That happened the day after they shot down that Chinese spy balloon. Now we have this happening in Oakland. Okay. Then today also, right? Because it's still today, right? We also had the blackout at JFK. Grounding, I think they said thousands of flights. I want to say 3,600, but I'm not 100% clear on that number. It was a ton of flights, though. Very, very interesting ongoings in the world right now. And it seems that we continue to get very interesting things happening to our not just infrastructure, right? But our electric infrastructure particularly seems to be under some sort of an attack over the last month. It's very, very serious things that need to be addressed, but nobody's really talking about them. We also have the various fires and train crashes and all of these things that keep spewing toxic chemicals into the ground, into the air, into the water, into the underground water. It's all these things combining would make you think that, shoot, if it's not the government doing it, it's a foreign enemy. But regardless, one time is happenstance. 2 times, okay, is really, really, really something you start to question, because at 2 times, that's a coincidence. 3 times, that's outright enemy action. So right now we are facing what most definitely is enemy action. Now the question is it coming from the elites in the government? I couldn't tell you. Is it coming from China or a foreign adversary? I couldn't tell you. But speaking of foreign adversaries, North Korea launched a intercontinental ballistic missile. So that happened, and the U.S. responded by doing drills with Japan and South Korea, because that's what we do when North Korea launches a missile. It's just very, very interesting, and everything seems to get more precarious as the days go on. We also have the issue of, well, what will now happen if North Korea makes a mistake and slips up? We see that Japan is moving away from being a self-defense nation, and they are going to an active war status, because since World War II, they haven't had a standing army. They relied on the U.S. to be pretty much their standing army, and they did have the defense force. But now they're moving so that they actually take aggressive action first. So as we see the militarization of the South Pacific, things will become more and more increasingly tense. We've seen what's happened with Russia and Ukraine. And right now, right now, there's a meeting in Munich in Germany where the U.S. is telling everybody that Russia has committed war crimes, and we know that they've committed war crimes, but we can't say what war crimes they've committed. That's questionable. That's very questionable. And on that note, outside of that, and this was Kamala Harris who said this out of her mouth. I mean, she's not the most eloquent person to deliver a message like that, I would say. And I think I'm putting it mildly for the greater masses. But also, in that same vein, they are putting together a new center in The Hague, Okay, The Hague is where the War Crimes Court is, so that they can. Oh, wait, let me rephrase that. They're putting together a new center in The Hague, okay, to look into the war crimes of Russia at the behest of Ukraine. Now, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with Ukraine and the Ukrainian war. Most of you probably couldn't place Ukraine on a map and probably didn't know it existed 3 years ago. So let me break down what's really been going on with the war so far and why we're not able to really rely on the Ukrainian government for information and details. We've already seen how Ukraine operates. When the war first broke out, they were literally shooting men in the streets that were trying to escape, that were Ukrainian citizens, because they said you will either fight or you will die. This has been documented. This is at the same point when they kicked the journalists out of the country because they didn't want them to see that. The defense minister, who is mysteriously resigned and now disappeared, stated that Zelensky decided that he did not want to evacuate the people in Ukraine because he wanted to make it more difficult for Russia when they came in, and he wanted to clog up and bottleneck all of the possible bridges and everything so nobody could get out, and it would make it more difficult for Russia to operate inside the country because there would still be civilians and citizens there. So that's your boy Zelensky. This is from his defense minister, who is now resigned and disappeared. Interesting fact that it seems like a ton of his cabinet have resigned and or disappeared. It's very interesting. So that aside, they also have no other media inside Ukraine except the government media. When Zelensky entered into power, he got rid of all opposition networks and stuff like that. Additionally, very recently, Zelensky even got rid of all opposition parties that would possibly go against Zelensky. Zelensky was installed in a coup. Well, what do they call it? A color, what do you call it? A color war, whatever the case is. Well, I forget. A color revolution. There we go. That's what you call it. A color revolution sponsored by our dear Central Intelligence Agency. These aren't hidden facts. These are things that you can easily research and find out. But that just goes to show you that they might not be the most reliable of people to purvey information. So that's something that we have to consider when apparently The Hague and the US are saying that this is done at the behest of the Ukrainian government. But I digress. That's important to remember in the future, because I guarantee you that down the line, there will be news and stuff coming out that the whole story over in Ukraine is vastly different than what's going on, because, you know, it is. But let's continue with the rest of the wackadoo news, because, I mean, it's just out of control, isn't it? So if you're familiar with what has happened, and we talked briefly about the different toxic chemicals that continue to be released into the atmosphere from all these different supposed accidents, East Palestine, Ohio, on the 4th of February, had a massive train derailment. 141 cars, 20 of them were carrying extremely hazardous materials. 14 of those cars were carrying vinyl chloride, which is extremely poisonous and is a gas at 8 degrees Fahrenheit. So that just lets you know how serious it is. Now that has been, the EPA has said that it's okay to drink the water there. They've told people it's okay to return to their homes. But the number of people experiencing skin rashes and trouble breathing and stuff like that continue to rise. The governor has even asked the U.S. government and Biden and FEMA for emergency assistance because of this event, which is being called the Ohio Chernobyl, because that's how serious this chemical explosion was. Now, the real thing about this chemical explosion is that the government blew the train up. The government blew the train up and released all of these toxic chemicals streams into the environment, into the sky. And you see the plume of smoke that it created. It looks worse than a nuclear bomb going off. It's absolutely abhorrent. And they're telling us that everything is okay. However, there are animals dying as far away as Canada. And I was watching some eyewitness reports on the ground up there where they're showing just looks like what you would consider to be like a oil glaze over water. Like, the little rainbow where you can see there's definitely some chemicals there or something. It's just all over the ground from the snow melting that they just recently had. It's very, very crazy. Birds are dying en masse. Animals are dying. And we're not just talking about in East Palestine, Ohio. We're talking about the surrounding areas. It's an extremely toxic event in the heartland of America, right on a river that feeds, well, hell, probably the largest section of our nation, which grows foods and grazes cattle. It's very, very concerning long term. It's especially concerning because the government recently this year, or maybe it was last year, because it's just February now, passed a law that says that if the government says that there is toxic land or something is wrong with the land, that the federal government can come in, sweep in, and take all your land and push everybody out. Well, now that's an interesting law, isn't it? Seems like something that they might try to use in the future. People, I'm going to need you to pay more attention to what's going on because stuff is getting very thick, very fast. But that's not the only issue. Now we have the issue with the sky, right? So as I said before, the wind blew the stuff right into Canada. That's no good. But it also, if you watch the wind patterns, I'm in New York State, in upstate New York. If you watch the wind patterns, it blew it all the way over here too. So I am concerned myself for where I live. Jiminy Jillikers, you guys. It is getting hectic out here. And speaking of getting hectic, let's talk about Texas. Let's not talk about the spill of nitric acid and stuff that happened outside of Houston. We talked about that already in a previous video. But let's talk about what happened in Austin, Texas the other night. Now, Texas, you would consider a very conservative state, wouldn't you? Texas, you would consider a very Republican state, wouldn't you? But what's happening in Texas is happening in many places across the nation right now. Many places across the nation are seeing an influx of, you can call them climate or habitat migrants that are coming from California, places like California and Washington, where Seattle is, or Oregon, where Portland is, because they don't like all of the crime. They don't like the water issues that are going on there, not because of climate change, but because of the horrible, horrible, horrible water laws that they've put in place, preventing water storage and all types of other stuff. It's absolutely out of control. And as we see, the crime and everything has gone out of control there. So people are fleeing. People are fleeing. Now, remember, the key thing about people fleeing is that in order to flee, you generally have to have means to flee. So that means that if you're more poverty-stricken or very middle class, you're probably not going to have the full funds to move like you would need to, which leaves it to the people who tend to be more affluent leaving the place. Those people who tend to be more affluent also tend to be Democrat voters who voted for the policies that have turned their states into, well, a hell's mouth. You know, it's like the gates of hell over there. Everything is fire, crime is everywhere, drugs are everywhere, homeless are everywhere. It's out of control. And I'm not just talking about California. I'm talking about Washington and Oregon as well. It's so bad in Oregon, 33% of the counties in Oregon have voted to secede from Oregon and become part of Idaho. Now, as these people move from California, Washington, and Oregon to other states, they are purpling our nation because they are all running to red states. Now, here's the concern there. They run to red states because of better quality of life, because of better safety, and they run there and then they vote for the same type of policies that encourage them to leave where they came from to begin with. It's very concerning. And this all has come to a head in Austin, Texas, which in the great state of Texas, Austin has become very blue and ruled by the Democrats. And in Austin, they have implemented the same policies that they have in California, Oregon, and Washington that encouraged the people to leave to begin with. So the day before yesterday, okay, there were large street rallies and races and people with street cars, you know, the race cars where they do the crazy stunts and stuff in the middle of the street, stuff like that, and just acting all types of uproarious with thousands of people, hundreds of people in the streets. Okay, so the police came down there to be like, hey, man, y'all got to move it on. Y'all acting a raw riot out here. And the people responded by assaulting the police with bottles and fireworks and bottle rockets, and it was just completely out of control. Massive property damage, massive public safety issue. And this all comes from the policies of these people who seem to continue to vote Democrat and vote for policies that are bad for them. And then they pick their bags up and they move to somewhere else that's red and they vote for the same policies that will destroy there as well. Drink water. Make sure it's filtered water because you know the water right now is going crazy. But here's the deal. In New York State, where I am, we have things like bail reform, less is more, raise the age, and other problematic policies that have been passed into law. We've recently seen those similar policies pass in other places and across the nation, and nobody is none too pleased about it. Excuse me 1 second. Nobody is any too pleased about it. But as things continue to accelerate, I need people to understand, because they keep seeming to say that it is poverty is the issue. Poverty is not the issue. It's poor policy. I'm going to say that again because that bears repeating. It's not poverty that's causing the crime. Okay, we've always had poverty. There are places in our country right now, if you look very deep down south, okay, or in very rural areas that are extremely impoverished to the point in which you wouldn't even know what to do if you went down there. I mean, we're talking favelas of Brazil impoverished. We're talking about real poor, and crime is much lower. Historically, there has been much more poverty in our nation and much lower crime. So it's very clearly not the poverty issue. There are countries and nations that are much poorer than ours, that, again, Brazil for one, that have much less crime. Brazil isn't a good example of less crime because the gangs run everything there, but that's a whole nother conversation. But I'm just using that as a wealth disparity example because that's better than other places I could name. But yeah, it's really, really getting out of control. There was reports of all types of craziness in New York City. I could just sit here and do a whole episode on just all the crime in New York City. I saw a video of this man. He's a store operator. He was shot. The guy comes in. I guess he's trying to rob the guy. And he shoots the guy, right? The guy's shot. He tries to fall to the floor and skirt himself under his little counter that he has. And I can't tell if it's the same guy or a different guy. The shooter leaves. He comes back in with a different gun. Now, first he shot him with a handgun. Then he comes back in with a rifle and then lays into the poor gentleman who's already there, huddled on the floor, defenseless, because it's difficult for legal law-abiding citizens to own a firearm in New York State because our governor, Kathy Hochul, and the state assembly and the state senate continue to pass laws to make it more difficult for you to defend yourself, but they continue on with their armed bodyguards. Somebody please make it make sense. So these are the same people who have pushed to defund the police. So now they don't want you to be able to protect yourself, and they don't want you to be able to call somebody for protection. These are the poor policies that are creating and exacerbating the issues of crime. This is the same thing that we saw in Austin over the weekend, because people don't know how to act because crime is not being punished. We've seen a rise in violent activity in schools, especially in my area in Rochester, but not just here. It's all across the nation. Okay, largely in blue cities, largely. But we've seen a rise of crime and violence inside the schools. In Monroe County, we've had, which is a county I live in, we've had multiple instances of violent behavior that's not just like regular school fights. I mean, excessive violence, right? So the other day we had a school sentry was slammed on the ground during a fight. Very disappointing. But the sentries can't really do anything to the kids, and they've taken the police out of the schools up here, which is a whole nother issue. But we've got raised the age and bail reform, so it doesn't matter because you can't even lock anybody up. So that's a very serious issue that needs to be addressed, but none of our elected officials seem to want to address it. Everybody seems to want to talk about guns when guns are not the problem. And you'll say, well, Marcus, guns are a problem. No, they're not. No, they're not. Not even a little bit. And I'll tell you why. Because out of all of the gun crime, and our mayor in the city came out and said this. He said none of the violence and crime that has happened, or especially the gun crime, has been committed by a legal firearm owner or by a legal gun. None. So please, you say stuff like that when it's clearly not the facts, okay? And our mayor, he's a Democrat. So, I mean, if he can see it, it must be other people can see it. So why won't they say it? Because it goes counter to the narrative that's being pushed so that they can take away and strip you of your Second Amendment right. It's not by mistake that they want to get rid of the police and take your Second Amendment right away. Let's be honest. There was a guy, he had a mustache like this in World War II that actually said that is the best way to go about basically getting over on the people, is to first get rid of the police and disarm the community. Mr. Mustachio from World War II said that. Okay. I don't want to say his name because the internet and people get very upset when you say stuff like that. And I don't want this video to be taken down. But for me, I have to say, the Second Amendment is one of the most important rights in America that we have. It's the reason why we didn't fall prey to internment camps like they forced all of the people into in Australia and New Zealand during the COVID measures, okay? Which is crazy because they were just snatching people out of their house. They were snatching Aborigines and how do you say the Moa? I can't even pronounce the name right, and it's hot. I'm hot and it's late right now. But and the Maori, if I'm saying it wrong, please somebody correct me. I don't mean any offense. But in New Zealand, they're just snatching them out of their houses and putting them in internment camps. This is outrageous, which is interesting because we just recently had Remembrance Day for the issue that happened with Pearl Harbor. And after Pearl Harbor, we put the Japanese Americans and Japanese that were in the country in internment camps. We had a bill in New York State. It was A416. That was an internment camp bill to put New Yorkers in internment camps. And then when that got struck down, it didn't get struck down, but we were able to thankfully fight it enough to get it pushed out of the assembly. And then the governor decided that she wanted to put it through health, through the, what do you call it? I'm trying to remember it. Through health services or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But through the health regulations, she tried to push it through. And then that got defeated, thankfully, in court. Okay. But speaking of court and things getting defeated, you can, and the oppression of the government, look at Canada. Look what Canada did to the truckers. Okay. To the truckers that convoyed and peacefully protested in Quebec to get them to remove the mandates and the just considerable disenfranchisement that the government had thrust upon them. They were being peaceful. They weren't hurting anybody. They weren't breaking anything. They were clean, everything. But the government shut down their bank accounts and was trying to force them away from protesting peacefully. There was no destruction, nothing was damaged, nothing. But the government shut down their bank accounts, froze their accounts, and now today, well, yesterday, Justin Trudeau was sitting up there in a press conference with his very smug face, okay, with this lady. I don't know who she is. I can't remember, but it's neither here nor there. And they were reading, what do you call it? What do you call the things that the judges write? The decisions, right? A decision by a judge that said, yeah, that was perfectly fine to use the War Powers Act, the War Powers Act. Let me get real close to the microphone and say this really seriously. The War Powers Act. Because that's how important it is. The War Powers Act against people who are protesting for their rights, who are Canadian citizens, peacefully. It's out of control. It's out of control. And the judge said, yeah, that's perfectly fine. And the lady was up on the stage with Justin Trudeau just grinning. And the lady's like, yeah, it was so awesome. It helped us get rid of them without having to use force and blah, blah, blah. And nice. And we're glad because we wanted to get rid of them because who cares about their rights? I mean, it's abhorrent. If you're on my Facebook, you've probably seen the video. If you're on my Twitter, it's on there too. My Marcus C. Williams Facebook. And it's on I only have one Twitter, which is Marcus, the number 4 ROC. But it's out of control. It's really out of control what's going on in Canada. And it's sad because people in America, one, the news doesn't cover it. And two, well, I should say the mainstream media. And two, we've already seen them try to do that with PayPal in America. We've already seen them freeze multiple people's accounts and debank them in America. Okay. And some people are cheering. They're like, yeah, that's the people on the right. That's the people that we don't like. Let me explain something to you. Okay. We've seen all of these chemical spills and everything go on. The government won't even acknowledge them. And it's very clear that it's poisoning the ground, the soil, and the air. Okay. This is going to cause massive issues with the food that we already have. Okay, that's number one, and we're going to come back to that. Not only that, 10,000 baby boomers are retiring a day. We already have an issue with Social Security where we just don't have enough. Okay, that's a very serious thing because we don't have enough people working because the last two generations didn't have enough kids. You understand what I'm saying? The baby boomers did not have enough kids to support their weight, which is now crushing all of us younger people, which we won't ever see Social Security, even though they take it out our checks, which I got a lot to say about it, but that's not why we're here this evening. But Social Security is getting run down. Medicaid is getting run down. And speaking of medical services for the elderly, look at China, and I'm going to come back. So look at China. China just had major protests because they cut the pension for the elders in China, except they didn't cut it for government workers, but they cut it for the elderly. So the elderly staged protests. Tens of thousands of Chinese people in China that are elderly staged protests, two different very large protests that we know about, and who knows whatever else, because it's hard to get clear information. China. But that's just a precursor to what's going to happen here. They'll keep everything for their government people to try to keep them in line, and they'll take it from everybody else. But when you go to try to protest, okay, with this whole now new way to debank people and make it so that you can't access your money, it'll be you on the receiving end of not being able to access your bank account if you want to protest the issues with Social Security or Medicare. It'll be you on that receiving end if you want to protest because you can't get enough food or you can't heat your house because prices are out of control and supply is slim. It'll be you that they come after. So please wake up. I know many people are starting to wake up that used to consider themselves very liberal. They're starting to wake up, especially after this East Palestine incident with all of the chemicals. They're like, well, how can we ever trust the government or the EPA again? I don't know how you trusted them to begin with, honestly. You should have known better. I mean, look at the history of our country. Look at all the towns that we had that are not there anymore because of government experiments or stuff like that. And I guess, honestly, they don't really cover that stuff. So how would you even really know anymore? And that's a whole nother separate issue. But I mean, geez, stuff is going a raw riot. Now, we talk about all of these issues that we see going on continuously. It's very disappointing to see the state of our nation in America right now. It's very disappointing to see the state of the world. But I always try to encourage everybody to stand up, speak up, and don't shut up on the serious issues that continue to affect us, especially in America. We have a constitution and we need to stand up for it every bit that we can, because soon enough, they'll be trying to strip the rest of it away because they try to take it away little by little every day. We've got some other issues happening that are considerable interest that people need to pay attention to. A couple weeks ago, we found out that America blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Okay, that's a pipeline between Russia and Germany. It looks like the whole thing behind all of that is they don't want Russia and Germany to get closer together, because with Russia's vast agricultural and production resources and Germany's technological resources, they could be a very serious powerhouse, and we don't want them to get too close, which was all kind of part of the issue because we didn't want them to get too reliant on Russia. But that's a whole nother separate conversation. Right now, the world is in turmoil, and it's up to us, the few that are paying attention, to do everything that we can in our communities and in our cities to push back against it. Okay, you need to be finding out who your county legislatures are, and you need to be finding out who your state assembly people are. You need to be finding out who your state senators are, and you need to be sure to engage these people. Not in any type of an aggressive manner, but in a manner in which you talk to them, get to understand what their goals are, tell them what your issues are and what is affecting you. Make sure that you go online and look up the bills that are being passed or worked on in whatever state and area you're in. Most of them are easily accessible online now. But we have to stay up because there's just so much that's getting passed continuously on a daily basis that it's hard to keep up. It really, really is. In other news, right? Because there's always some other news. It's very interesting also that, and I almost forgot about this. So I'm glad that I remembered. It's very interesting that now Donald Trump is going to go to East Palestine, and Joe Biden still hasn't gone there yet. That's very, very interesting. Another interesting thing outside of that is that the Salmon Islands which are a very important strategic part in over there in the Pacific area, have done away with anti-China laws that they have there, so that they're coming closer and closer to China. There's a whole backstory there about how China sent in military forces to help quell what is basically a rebellion that went on over there, but that's something else to talk about. And my biggest topic for this evening, I think, would be this. Lindsey Graham urges the U.S. to declare Russia a state sponsor of terror. How much more are they going to do to push us into World War III with Russia? And here's my issue with Lindsey Graham. Why are you continuing to push forever wars? Well, Marcus, what's a forever war? I'll give you an example. Afghanistan, forever war. Okay. Iraq, forever war. Okay. Libya, forever war. It's interesting that all of these forever wars seem to all be in oil-rich nations. Well, I mean, Afghanistan has a lot of heroin, so that's another thing, which we're not going to talk about. But We've got all these forever wars. Syria, forever war. We didn't have any business there to begin with. We didn't really have any business in any of the other places, but we definitely didn't have any business there. Okay. It was America who funded ISIS to give them the armaments and stuff like that. I don't know how far back you guys remember, but Obama was funding them and giving them weapons before they became ISIS. So that's a whole nother problem. We have a history of doing that. And I really wish we'd learn from that what's happening in Ukraine. We've given them so many armaments and they don't even have enough people to use them. So where are those armaments going? And they keep asking for more and more military aid. Where is this going? You don't have enough people to use it. The people aren't trained to use it. Where is it going? I guarantee you that our own weapons will end up being used against us in the very near future. Guarantee you. Guarantee you. Because that's what always happens. Taliban, the Irilzia, the Al-Shabaab in Africa. Are we being serious with ourselves? You know, like, I mean, we fund all of these organizations that end up using our own weapons against us that we gave them. It's crazy. It's crazy. I could go down a list. But with Lindsey Graham pushing to declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism is a extremely bold move. And I wish he'd sit his old self down. He's been in Congress too long. And I know that some people might like him. I know even some Republicans might say, hey, why you say that? And I'd be like, you know exactly why I'm saying that. Where has Lindsey Graham been all of this time on our very serious issues that needed to be addressed? Oh, he hasn't been addressing them. So for him to do this shows you exactly who he cares about. And it's not the American people. It's not. We just sent $100 million to Turkey, which, again, if you've watched other broadcasts we've done, you know that Turkey's about to go to war with Greece, and they've got a whole bunch of other stuff going on with Syria, and it's out of control. But anyway, so Lindsey Graham has not been doing what he needs to do for the people that he's supposed to represent, which is the Republican Party. But I mean, hey, right? He's all the way on the top. He's been there for years. And who's going to challenge him? Who's going to hold his feet to the fire, so to speak? And this is the problem. So many Republicans continue to try to fund. I think we're officially over $100 billion, okay, spent in Ukraine, which is more money than we've spent the whole time, the almost 15 years that we were in Vietnam, okay? Because remember, we were there with the French before we went in there hardcore, and after we were still there doing stuff. Anyway, but that's neither here nor there. The whole time, we've spent more money there than we spent in Afghanistan. It's out of control. It's out of control. Spent more money there than we've done in pretty much all the other Mediterranean, Middle Eastern countries together. It's insane. When we've got poor people, homeless people on the street right now that need food, people that are having difficulty paying for food and medicine right now, when we've got issues with food cupboards closing because they can't afford food because of the inflation, when eggs cost $10 a dozen. Okay, maybe if you go to a bulk store, you might be able to get 18 for $10. But it's like $8 for a dozen right now. If you go to Walmart, it's out of control. Out of control. Absolutely out of control. And that depends on where you live. It might actually be more. You know, did you get her something expensive for Valentine's Day? Did you buy her some eggs? And I jest, but this is really what everything is coming and boiling down to. We really have to do better as a nation and get our politicians to focus on what needs to be done, which is serve the best interests of us, the American people, not try to wipe us out, not try to wipe our bank accounts out, not try to wipe out our food supply, not try to black us out and wipe out our electricity and internet supply. You know, serve us like they're supposed to. They're our servants. We are not theirs. We are not there for them to get rich off of. We are there for them to serve and then go back to public life. But too many have made masterful careers for many decades off of our backs, our labor, our sweat, tears, and pain. And with that being said, we need to make sure that we are engaging our elected officials, but in a respectful manner in which we're able to deliver our messages that we demand the service that they're supposed to give us. Period. End of story. They're our representatives. They work for us. We don't work for them. Like Joe Biden said to that guy in the Pennsylvania factory, he's like, I don't work for, was it a mine? He's like, I don't work for you. Well, but you do, Joe. You do work for us. You do work for the American people. At least you're supposed to. That's your job. Like, you got one job. That's it. And it's sad because many politicians feel that way. But on a positive note, there's been a massive revival that's sweeping the nation, and many people at college campuses all across the nation have been praying and coming together and fellowshipping, and it has been a very beautiful sight. It started in one area and has expanded to over 30 college campuses at this time, and I believe that's a beautiful thing because we need more togethership and we need more fellowshipping. We really do. That's how we're going to come out of all of this, by coming together. They want to continue to separate us and divide us however they can. And it's time that we put that aside and take a stand. And with that, stand up, speak up, and don't shut up. Take action. You guys be blessed, be well, and I'll catch you